Hello everyone. Today we're going to start looking at how to factor polynomials. Remember, a polynomial is just a mathematical term for an expression. So the first way or strategy that we can use to factor a polynomial is factoring out the greatest common factor, or the GCF. That's what I'll call it moving forward, but it stands for the greatest common factor. And I do want to let you know this. Factoring is kind of how we divide polynomials. It's like we're undoing multiplication is what we do when we factor. So for example, take a look at this one. Oops. I don't know why that's not writing. There we go. Example 1. Let's say we have 24x plus 8. When we look for the greatest common factor, it's like we're finding what is the biggest number we can divide in amount of variables that we can divide into each of these terms. Well, when I look at these, I know that 8 times 3 is 24, and of course 8 times 1 is 8. So I'm going to factor out, that's what we say, I'm going to factor out an 8. So here's the way I do that. It's like I'm doing the distributive property backwards. So I'm going to say 24 divided by 8 is 3, and I didn't do anything to the x, so I'll leave it alone. Now let's divide 8 by 8, and 8 divided by 8 is positive 1. So this polynomial factored completely is 8 times 3x plus 1. Let's try a couple more. So let's pull out the greatest common factors on a few more. So let's say we have 6x squared minus 9x. Well, first let's look at the numbers or the coefficients. I notice that both of those are divisible by 3. 6 is and 9 is divisible by 3. So I can factor out a 3. Now let's look at our x's. When you look at your letters or your variables, you want to take out as many as you can. Here's what I mean. X squared has 2 x's. That means x times x. X, of course, there's just 1. So the most x's that I can take out of all of the terms is x. So watch this. 6 divided by 3 is 2. I had 2 x's, I took 1 out, so I'm left. I factored out 1, so I'm left with 1. Now let's deal with the minus 9x. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. I had 1 x here. Well, I factored out an x, so I'm left with no x's inside there. So this polynomial fully factored is 3x times 2x minus 3. Let's try another one. Let's factor Let's factor negative 6m squared p squared plus 8m to the 4th p squared, or p to the 2nd power. Let's kind of mix up the variables a little bit. So first let's look at our numbers. What are both of those numbers divisible by? Well, I've got 6 and I have 8. So the biggest number that both of those is divisible by is 2. Let's look at our variables, our letters. Here I have m to the 2nd power, and here I have m to the 4th. The most I can factor out is 2, because that first term only has 2 m's. Now let's look at our p's. We have p squared and p squared. Well, that means we can factor out p squared from both of those. So now let's find what our other factor is. We have 2m squared, p squared. Let's find our other factor. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. I had 2 m's. I factored 2 m's out, so there are no m's left inside the parentheses. P squared, I had 2 p's. I factored out 2 p's, so again, there are no p's left. Now let's look at our next term. 8 divided by 2 is positive 4. I had 4 m's and I factored out 2, so I'm left with 2. I had 2 p's, I factored out 2 p's, so there are no more p's left inside the parentheses. So my 2 factors for this polynomial are 2m squared p squared and -3 plus 4m squared. So I have factored that polynomial completely. So again, the first way that we can factor a polynomial is the greatest common factor. Now there's a strategy when we are specifically factoring trinomials. And this is kind of precursor to what we're going to do with our next function. So let's look at factoring trinomials. Before we do that, a trinomial, if you'll remember, has 3 terms. Okay, so this strategy only will work if you have 3 terms. And it has to be in this form: ax squared plus bx plus c. So you have to have an x squared term, an x term, and then a constant. That ABC is important because we're going to do a strategy called, I call it magic x. It may be called other things, but I call it magic x. And I like to say magic x has your back. And what that means, and you'll understand a little bit better in a minute, we put our b term up in the top, and then we take a, whatever number's in front of x squared, times our c, our constant, multiply and put it in the bottom. Before I explain any more, let's do one. Let me show you one with numbers. I think it'd be easier to understand that way. So the first trinomial that I want to factor is x squared minus x minus 6. Now remember, if there's no number in front of a letter, it's an invisible 1 or an understood 1. So watch this. Magic x has your back. B, A, C. A, B, C. So my b coefficient is -1. So I'm going to write -1 up here. My a is 1 and my c is -6. Well, what is 1 times -6? It's -6. Magic x has your back. I say that every time. You'll notice I do that. Now here's what we want to find, because we're going to factor this into 2 binomials. Here's how we're going to do it. We want to find the factors, that means what we multiply to get a times c, and we want it to add or subtract to give us the b. Jot that down because you'll do this every time. So let's look at the factors of -6, or just of 6. We'll deal with the signs in a few minutes. So 1 times 6 gives us 6. 2 times 3 gives us 6. Now let's look at that -1. Which of these set of factors will either add or subtract to give me 1? Well, 2 times 3. Now let's deal with our signs. I need 2 times 3 to be negative, but I want it to apparently obviously subtract to give me a -1. So watch this. I'm going to make my 3 negative. Is 2 times -3 -6? Yup. Is 2 minus 3 -1? Yes, it is. So now I'm going to write my 2 factors. X, this is a positive 2, so x plus 2 times x minus 3. So those are my factors of x squared minus x minus 6. And I can test that using FOILs. And I'm going to encourage you to do that every time. So let's go first, outside, inside, last, simplify, and that does give us back our answer. So these are the factors of our trinomial. Now let's practice this a few more times so you'll get comfortable with it. So for 5, let's factor x squared plus 7x plus 12. Remember, magic x has your back. B, A, C. A, B, C. So my A is 1, my B is 7, my C is 12. So B is 7, Magic X has your back. 1 times 12 is 12. So let's find our factors of 12. We have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. So I noticed that 3 times 4 will give me 12, but also 3 plus 4 will give me 7. So the factors are x plus 3 times x plus 4. And I want you to get in the habit of multiplying to check your answer, because sometimes things look like they'll work, but they won't. So let's use FOILs. First, outside, inside, and last, simplify, and that does give us back our original polynomial. So these are the factors for x squared plus 7x plus 12. Okay, let's keep practicing. So let's say we have m squared minus 10m minus 16. Remember, Magic X has your back. A times C. So this is A, B, C. My B, or my middle coefficient, is negative 10. And A, which is 1 times negative 16, is negative 16. So first let's find our factors of 16. We have 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and 4 times 4. So out of these, which ones will add or subtract to give us 10? Well, that's going to be 2 and 8. Now let's deal with our signs. So in order for them to add, we want them to add. To give us negative 10, we have to have negative 2 and negative 8. That becomes negative 10. But what do you notice? Negative 2 times negative 8 would be a positive 16. If that were a plus 16 or a positive 16 at the bottom, these would work. But there's nothing I can do. No other numbers. I can't switch the signs to create what I need to happen. Multiply to get negative 16, add or subtract to get negative 10. So this is what we call prime. Or sometimes you'll hear it said that this is not factorable. Okay, so these are two different answers that mean the same thing. So if you can't get it to work, get it to fit what we need, that's your answer. Either prime or not factorable. Now let's take a look at finding the greatest common factor and Magic X has your back together. So we're going to put those two things together. So let's look at example 7. First of all, I want us to do negative x squared minus 3x plus 28. Here's the final thing I want to tell you about Magic X. In order to be able to use Magic X for a trinomial, your A has to be positive, your leading coefficient on your x squared term. So in order to do that here, I can factor out a negative 1. So all that means is if I divide all of these numbers by negative 1, the signs change. So this becomes x squared. Negative 3 divided by negative 1 is positive 3x. 28 divided by negative 1 is negative 28. So just remember, if you factor out a negative 1, that just means all your signs change. Now I can use Magic X. Magic X has your back. So my B coefficient now is a 3, and I want to use this one after I have factored out my negative 1. So that's my A, my B, and my C. A is 1 times C, which is negative 28, so that's negative 28. So now let's find factors of 28. We have 1 times 28, 2 times 14. Is there anything else? Let's see, not 3. 4 times 7, and I'm actually going to stop there because I notice if I have 4 and 7, I can make the 4 negative, and 7 minus 4 gives me this 3 that I need, and negative 4 times 7 gives me this negative 28 that I need. So my factors are negative 1 times x minus 4 times x plus 7. Now remember, I want to test this using FOILs to make sure it gives me back what I need. So first, outside, inside, last, simplify. So that gives me x squared plus 3x minus 28. But I started with negative x squared minus 3x plus 28. Remember, we have to multiply by that negative 1 that we factored out. And when we do that, we get back our original polynomial. So these are the factors of that polynomial. I do want to let you know we can also make this 1 invisible and just write negative on the outside x minus 4 times x plus 7. Let's try one final one to make sure that you're okay with combining greatest common factor or factoring out the greatest common factor and using magic x. So let's take a look at this one. Let's factor completely 2x squared minus 26x plus 72. So we always want to start factoring by saying, because it's the most simple of them all, do I have a greatest common factor I can divide out? And in this case, I notice every one of these, 2, negative 26, and 72, are divisible by 2. 2x squared divided by 2 is 1x squared, so I'm just going to write x squared. Negative 26x divided by 2 is negative 13x, and 72 divided by 2 is 36. Now I can say magic x has your back. You don't have to write the BAC every time. I'm just doing that so you can see where I get the numbers that I use. All right, so here's my A, which is 1, my B, negative 13, and my C, which is 36. So I'm going to put negative 13. A times C is going to be 36. Now let's get our factors of 36 and see which ones add or subtract to give us negative 13. So 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9, and right there it is. 9 and 4, if I make them both negative, will give me negative 13 when I add them. And negative 4 times negative 9 gives me positive 36. So my factors are going to be 2 times x minus 4 times x minus 9. And again, I always like to check on this assignment because prime or not factorable is an option. So we want to make sure that we have an answer. So let's do FOILs. First, outside, inside, last, and simplify. Oops, sorry about that. Minus 13x plus 36. But remember, we have to multiply everything by 2 because we factored out the 2 up here. So 2 times x squared is 2x squared. 2 times negative 13x is negative 26x. And 2 times 36 is positive 72. That was our original trinomial. So our factors are 2 times x minus 4 times x minus 9.